I'm Tom Simmons.
And I'm Sarah Boyson.
And this is 312, the HRP podcast.
Today we're talking about the film Erin Brockovich, which came out in 2000.
Starring Julia Roberts, the film follows Erin Brockovich's character as she investigates contamination in the PG&E site in Hinckley, California.
Specifically dealing with hexavalent chromium that leached into groundwater and traveled to residential properties and affected an entire town.
It's Women's History Month, so we're going to be talking about the film. We're going to be talking about the technical details of the contamination and the remediation with a coworker of ours who's actually instrumental in the remediation process. We're going to talk to some of the different women at HRP who have seen the movie and get their perspective on it as well. All right, folks, stick with us. We're going to join our two guests now. We'll see you over there.
See you soon.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are here with our two guests.
Darby Hiddle.
I'm the founder and owner of Thunderbird Environmental.
And our guest of honor on this episode.
My name is Kurt Franson, and I'm a senior project manager with Darby at Thunderbird.
So we've been talking about the film Erin Brockovich, and right now we're going to talk about the details of the actual contamination, the pollution, with someone who was there and did essential work in the very early stages of the remediation. Kurt, can you tell us, to start with, your kind of background and how you started out and ended up as part of the Hinckley project?
Sure. So my training is in biology and biochemistry, and my education was in the Midwest in various land-grant institutions, so I'm fairly familiar with agricultural ecosystems and operations, as well as the biochemistry of various plants, organisms, things like that. So I decided not to go, after my PhD, I decided not to go into academia, and I wanted to become a consultant. And the first job I was able to land was with a company called Ecology and Environment in Buffalo, New York. So I went to work with them out in Buffalo, and that was back in 1986. Lo and behold, in early 1988, they invited me to a company meeting out in San Francisco, which was fortuitous because the Hinckley matter had been a project that Ecology and Environment in San Francisco had already started working on in 1987. If I recall correctly, it was a year or two before that Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, actually discovered that they had hexchrome in the groundwater. And so they realized that they needed to do some investigation as to what in the world is going on and why is this here. And so with that as a setup, let me just go back to when they first built this compressor station. It's for natural gas, high-pressure natural gas transmission line that came out of Arizona and went up into the southwest to near Barstow, California, where Hinckley, California is actually located, and then the pipeline continued up north through the entire length of California. A compressor station is there to compress the gas such that it can move on for another 40 to 60 miles in the pipeline, and then it gets picked up by another compressor station, pressurized again, and it moves on. These compressor stations at the time in 1956, they typically used reciprocal engines. They now use gas turbine engines, but at the time they used reciprocal engines. And as you might imagine, they need a lot of cooling water to keep those systems operating properly. All cooling systems have corrosion inhibitors added to them. And back in 1952, when they built this system, they used a chromate corrosion inhibitor. And so that's using hexavalent chromium to keep the corrosion from getting out of control in the various cooling pipes. Every day, they always dumped a little bit of that cooling water into an unlined pond, which was state-of-the-art for 1952. They continued doing that from 1952 to 1966, each day releasing hexavalent chromium-containing cooling water into the unlined pond, over and over again. So the question is, what happens to hexavalent chromium once it hits the unlined pond? Well, now you're on the edge of the Mojave Desert here. So most of us would normally think, well, all the water is just going to evaporate off, and then the chromium is just going to settle out and everything is going to be fine. Well, that's not actually what happens. When you have that much hydraulic loading into a small area and you have the soil geochemistry that is just the right kind of matrix that allows the hexavalent chromium to be nice and comfortable, chemically speaking, to stay in its hexavalent state. It can't convert to its trivalent state, which is essentially non-toxic, and it basically comes out of solution and precipitates. So that wasn't happening because the soils were just perfect to keep it as hexavalent chromium. And so day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year, all this hydraulic loading with chromate in the water, and it just keeps going down and down and down and down. When I first saw the unlined ponds, they were all green. Now you don't see, now a desert landscape shouldn't look oddly olive green. You know something's up if the soils are olive green. And that's because some of the hexavalent chromium did convert to trivalent, but most of it went down 90 feet down to the groundwater. And then once it got to the groundwater, away it went. And by the time I came on board in March of 88, the plume was already about 2 miles long and about a mile wide. And the concentration was such that, you know, that yellow banana behind you, it's stuffed banana, that's about the color of the water at one well that was the highest concentration we ever measured. As a matter of fact, I had never seen water come out of a monitoring well that was that color. That was just absolutely shocking to me. That's essentially how that all happened.
Was that method one that they, at the time, could have reasonably thought was safe for them to do, given some of the factors that you laid out, being in the desert, things going to evaporate? Should they have known better? Could it be seen as like, yeah, you know, until you really looked into it, you didn't know that kind of thing was going to happen?
Well, you have to remember how our learning moves forward. Many people of that generation, and at that time in the 50s, had this sense that the earth had an infinite capacity to absorb all kinds of stuff. I'm a child that was born, you know, in the mid-50s. So I had a father who, even though he interestingly became the first environmental manager of the predecessor company of Enron, which is another story for another day. But even I remember him saying to me that that's okay. It's not going to be a problem. The earth has a lot of capacity to absorb a lot of stuff. And over the years, what has humanity learned? We've learned that no, the earth doesn't have an infinite capacity, and things like to get up and move in the environment. Back then, that just wasn't at top of their mind. Top of mind was, we need gas. We've got to pump gas. How do we get that done? How do we get it done quickly? That was the order of the day.
Yeah.
And they only discovered subsequently that that that's a problem. Should they have understood a little bit more about how hexavalent chromium? Yeah, some of the chemists probably understood, but again, a lot of people, even chemists, even well-trained people, infinite capacity.
Yeah. Sarah, as a geologist, someone that works in remediation, what are your thoughts on kind of hearing how the situation came to unfold in Hinckley before even the remediation started?
I mean, it sounds like, maybe they should have known a little bit better. Maybe they should have realized that hexavalent chromium might want to put some extra precautions, but it's just interesting, hearing the perspective, understanding that the way we thought about the world was completely different at that time. But now that we have that hindsight, it's a little shocking.
Yeah, that's one of the things that most interested me was that, so in the 50s at the time, this would have been considered an adequate system to deal with hexachrome. But by the time we get to the late 80s, we know that this is a huge issue.
Well, actually, by 1970, when the Clean Water Act came out, because at that time, the Cuyahoga River was catching on fire. We had Love Canal, which is right outside of Buffalo. And so you're just in a Bermuda Triangle of issues.
It was wonderful living in Buffalo. I can still take you on a tour of all the hazardous waste sites that dot the land in that area. But remember that they went to hexavalent chromium because it was essentially one of the best antioxidants, rust preventers that they could use. By the mid-'60s, they had developed phosphate-based corrosion inhibitors, and they were using that, and so that outdated the use of hexavalent, and they stopped using it.
So the Hinckley contamination that we see in the movie where it contaminated all the drinking water wells, that was just from when they started it until they switched over.
Yes.
And it took
14 years.
A couple of 14 years.
So they operated that way for 14 years, from 1966, when they stopped using hexchrome, to the time that they discovered it in the mid-'80s. And then they finally reported it to the Regional Water Quality Control Board in December of 1987. And again, I came on board in March of '88 on the project. So for approximately 20 years, the hexavalent chromium was slowly but surely migrating along. And
how far was it from the discharge point at the lagoon to like the nearest drinking water supply well?
Less than a mile.
Less than a mile.
Yeah, it's even more complicated because you also had farms, dairy farms, so they were pulling out water and watering their cattle. They were irrigating with this hexavalent tainted water. Various homes were in Little Hinckley, and so they're all pulling on it as well.
And a lot of people, I would imagine, in Hinckley worked at the...
So some of them did.
They kind of touched on that in the movie. There were some employees who, worked there, and that was like their livelihood. So this was providing jobs for the area. But it's interesting. So what year did they stop using hexavalent chromium? Would you say 65? 66. And they started in 52. So 14 years of use. And so from 66, after all the litigation,
to about 80,
was it determined like when people started really like getting sick from it?
Yeah, that was my question.
What's
when
the lag
when
time?
did they start making that connection that hey, we've got this plant here and all of these people are having these really strange, unlikely illnesses all in this one town. How did that connection come about?
Let's first of all ask ourselves the question: how frequent does cancer occur, and also what kinds of cancers does hexavalent chromium cause? Hexavalent chromium is a class A carcinogen, but primarily in the nasolarynx, so in the nasal system and down the throat. And also it can cause burns and such if you get it in a high enough concentration on your skin.
Liver and kidney damage too, if I understand.
Perhaps. Again, it depends on what happens. Remember, hexchrome wants to convert. So you remember, if you're going to get kidney damage, it's got to get through the stomach and be absorbed and then have its effect on the kidneys. So it's more likely that you're going to have it in the nasolarynx because the mucosa of that system is more susceptible to having an impact. Did it really cause those particular issues that are discussed in the film or not? I'm not here to say it's one way or the other. What you always have to remember about a film is that they're there to tell a story. It has some basis in fact and some basis to help create and carry on the point that the people who are making the film, the filmmaker, what is the point they're trying to convey?
If the point was to scare me, they succeeded. Because you watch that movie, you're like, whoa.
A point I want to make for environmental professionals is environmental professionals have to be ready for others to interpret their data in different ways than they would feel comfortable with. So when we generate data, this is why as a project team, it's always important to remember what was the assignment you were given? What's the best way to carry it out? What's the best data quality and usability that you can achieve for the scope, schedule, and budget that you're given? Once you've done it and you've met your goal, be prepared that people are going to ask you about why did you do it this way? Who told you to do it this way? And there's all these people who want to interpret your intent was to mislead. Our job, because this is the way we're trained, this is the way we're taught in school, this is the way everybody has interacted with me as I came up in the consulting business, was to do the very best we possibly can to not make mistakes and to be honest and forthright. But there are others who will interpret your work in an adverse way, and you always have to be prepared for that. And it sometimes puts you in very uncomfortable positions. So one of the things I'd like to bring it back to and talk with Sarah about, because this gets into remediation. So so here I am. I was brought on to work on risk assessment, particularly ecological risk assessment. And yes, you can have ecological risks in a desert system and also in an agro ecosystem. But I also was involved with the fate and transport analysis. I worked with a groundwater modeler who was employed by Pacific Gas and Electric. And he did the groundwater modeling. I was worried about the solute chemistry that was going on. And in looking at the soil geochemistry and the hydrogeochemistry that was going on, I began pondering, well, gee whiz, if we had enough organic matter, we should be able to convert all of this hexavalent chromium into trivalent chromium, and we're good.
Yeah, and trivalent chromium, for anybody that doesn't know, is not nearly as harmful. It's actually, in some cases, beneficial, with the right dosage.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, one of the things they say in the movie is that there's, hexavalent, which is so dangerous, but then there's these other forms of chromium that aren't, and some that are good for you, and that PG&E was even telling people initially that, no, this is the good kind of chromium. It's actually good for you. Have a cigarette.
Well, actually, you can buy chromium picolinate, at Walgreens and CVS. So, yeah, my point here is that while I'm doing my job, I came up with some understanding of what was going on and what might work. After lunch, I happened to run into the project manager and the remediation engineer, and they were talking about what they were thinking about for a remediation system for treating the groundwater. And the remediation engineer, brilliant guy, really enjoyed working with him, but he was thinking too much in a process way. Mm-hmm. And he wanted a big process treatment train. And I looked at him and said, there might be a better way. We've got people who are farming out here. What's the number one expense of farming in the Mojave Desert? Well, it's water. Mm-hmm. So give the farmers all the water that we're pulling out of the withdrawal remediation wells, give them free water to irrigate their crops. And as that water hits the plants and hits the organic matter in the soils, it's going to convert to trivalent. We can do a mass balance analysis over the full treatment time of the remediation, of how long it would take to withdraw all that matter. And I was able to calculate a mass balance that it's not going to add up to sufficient chromium in these soils to be a problem. The human health risk assessors estimated, would farm workers who move the irrigation system, would they be exposed to unacceptable levels of hexchrome? That wasn't found to be an issue. So I convinced the project team to at least consider using not a typical engineering approach, but using an ecological approach, what would now be called, a green remediation approach to remediate the problem. That was the first remediation system for groundwater that got applied, and it was one of the first ones, if not the first, remediation system in California that got permitted for this kind of work.
Which is pretty
so
amazing.
As a lowly geologist who got a withdrawal while failing from organic chemistry, what is the difference between putting the water directly on a farm field and putting the water directly in the lagoon where they were dumping?
It's actually the organic matter is the difference.
It's the difference between the desert soils and the desert soils that had been altered because they had been changed to allow for crop growth, and the more organic matter due to growing hay and growing alfalfa increases the organic matter content of those soils. And it's that organic matter that facilitates the redox reaction to convert hexavalent chrome to trivalent.
So if the people in Hinckley who had drinking water wells took the water out of their wells and washed off their salad before dinner and ate the salad, it would all be trivalent at that point? Does it happen instantaneously or?
Yeah, it happens very rapidly.
It does?
Yeah.
And so that's why the workers who were moving the irrigation system weren't at risk, because when it came out of the pipes, did they have a risk of breathing it in? Or
well, that was one of our concerns, and the question gets down to the size of the aerosol droplets, and are they of sufficient? Are they of the sufficient correct size to get well into the nasolarynx in order to have their effect?
Wow. So it was, and you probably saved them millions of dollars by coming up with a relatively simple solution to remediation.
Well, perhaps we saved them some money, but of course we all know that Pacific Gas and Electric ended up paying for the time, what was it, a third of $1 billion of a settlement.
Wow.
From the court case.
And of course, a pump and treat system is great. It's good to help reduce the plume size and keep it from expanding. But we all know you got to treat the source, right?
Right.
So I understand that they did some in situ remediation.
Yes, they
and a
removed
couple
some,
of source
they
areas.
removed some of the soils from the pond, and they went down quite a ways. And all of those soils, which was essentially all trivalent, that was put into roadway subbase, and that's how those soils were handled. And so that was it was used as part of a roadway. Interesting.
Yeah. No, I know that they did some injections out there.
Yes. Yes. That was all after the initial setup of the green remediation system using alfalfa fields. That was subsequent to my work when they started doing some additional injections with ethanol, lactate, and other adding additional wells for recovery. Over the since 1988, even though they've been pumping and treating, the plume had continued to increase in size from the 2 miles where it was when I was working there. It's now upwards of 8 miles long. It's gone deeper. It's become wider, which suggests that even though we had a pretty good idea of how much went down there, it was a much more complex system. And it was, frankly, that whole system was just a perfect, it was a perfect situation for hexavalent chromium to get up and move through the environment.
And so as long as it stays in the groundwater, it remains as hexchrome?
Pretty much.
As the plume continues on,
yeah.
There's no conversion at depth?
Yeah, there's probably some, but it's not sufficient to significantly impact the concentrations.
And then, like on the alfalfa fields, all of the converted trivalent stuff, it didn't impact the cows that were like eating it. No.
That raises another thing. It was no one had ever in the company that I worked with at Ecology and Environment. They all were scratching their heads. Why is Kurt asking to buy several heads of cattle? What are you going to do with the cattle, Kurt? And trying to explain that to the guy who controlled, cutting checks, he could not understand it whatsoever. So, but I hired a veterinarian. And we bought some of the older dairy cows, and we euthanized them with sodium phenobarbital, and did a dissection of the cows. We took meat samples, fat samples, milk samples, blood samples, every kind of tissue that you might imagine is in a cow, including taking samples out of the paunch. One of the 4 stomachs, and we sent that all in for analysis to see how much hexavalent chromium, how much total chromium, and all the levels in these dairy cows was exactly where we would have expected.
So
that's amazing.
So today in the news or in the last few years, it's there's a farm in Maine and the cows all ate alfalfa that had PFAS, and now the PFAS is in the milk, and the farmers are dumping the milk down the drain. So none of that in Hinckley resulted in like chromium-laden milk at all?
That's correct. And remember, the PFAS issue is a very different issue. It likes to, like hexchrome, it'll move, but it's a behavior that's entirely different, right. And it's a behavior that's even more complex.
Every time we have these discussions at lunch down at the Thunderbird office, I'm just thankful that the world has chemists because.
Well, remember who comes up with all of these great great chemical ideas. It's chemists.
True.
And then we discover, oh, good grief, it does this, that, or it's very toxic. I think so. Similar things. The East Palestine rail disaster. You have chlorinated solvents that some were spilled, some were volatilized off, some were burned off, and then you have EPA coming and saying, from an air toxic standpoint, everything's fine. And then you have other experts saying, well, we have some data that suggests it's not necessarily fine. And you have people on the ground who are scratching their heads saying, well, what is it? I don't trust anybody. And besides that, I'm getting headaches, I've got itchy skin, or I've got other maladies that are a problem. So what are you to do, and how do you help people deal with these things? That's where you really, again, you have to rely on your project team and stick with doing what you're supposed to be doing. Yeah. But keep your eyes and ears open to paying attention to what's going on and how, try your best to work with the team to solve the problems that you're tasked with. But know that there will be people who will interpret your data differently. Actually, I want to make a point about the East Palestine thing. It's possible that the regulators were correct and that when they say that there's no air toxic problem, and that the researchers were correct, we're saying there's still a problem.
Right.
Because the question is, what data are they actually talking about?
Yeah.
There might have been some stuff in certain soils or partial combustion products that fell onto somebody's house that they could touch or they could sample and detect certain chemicals. So it's possible that the regulators were correct, EPA was correct in their public statement, and that these researchers were correct in their public statement. It's all a matter of what data and what the scope of work was. You'll notice that all of those fine details are lost on the journalists. Mm-hmm. That isn't to criticize journalism. It's because, again, a journalist is trying to tell a story, but they don't provide all of those important details. And so it's important not to get overly upset or concerned, but listen to the details and the facts that are being presented.
Mm-hmm. And I will add that since that site hasn't been litigated yet, we could take a drive out there if you want to do some marketing.
No, thank you.
It's so funny because to me saying, we don't have enough information to have a proper conclusion for this, to me that's a normal thing that you can say and it's acceptable. But for somebody who's going through a disaster, living in like East Palestine, that's not acceptable. They need to know what to do, what their risks are, and do what's best for them and their families. But, it's hard to say, we're still looking into it, and they kind of say, what do you expect me to do? What I'm looking to you for answers, and you're telling me you don't know. So I get the disconnect.
Yeah. And this is another reason why when these things become public and there are public interactions, almost the people that are typically doing the presentation are communication specialists. Have you noticed that? Mm-hmm. It's not the scientists and engineers. Generally, they don't want us out there because we're not as effective in terms of communication. That's not where our strengths are. And so, I always encourage people, if people don't believe you, just relax. It's okay for there to be disagreement. It's a normal part of the process.
Hi, Carly.
Hi, Tom.
Hi. We just watched Erin Brockovich. We had a little screening of it here at the office.
We did.
And I am interested in getting your reaction as a woman, as a geologist. What'd you think?
I love that movie, honestly. I've seen it multiple times, and I would rewatch. Definitely a repeatable movie.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I got home and I was telling my parents about it, and I was like, why haven't you guys seen this? Like, can we watch it tonight? But yes, great movie. I think I remember the first time I saw it, maybe I was in high school or something. It might have been something that they showed in our like AP environmental science class, like at the end of the year after you take your exam and there's nothing else exciting to do.
Yeah.
But I will say, like, it's a very inspirational movie for a young woman, especially being someone who was starting to get interested in the field of environmental science and, like, you know, getting to see the environmental justice side of it too, where, like, the main kicker of the movie is basically Erin is just trying to fight for these people. She knows that they were wronged, and she will do anything in her power to make sure that things are set right.
Yeah.
So I think that perspective and just seeing how hard she fought for these people was very, very inspiring. Like, she wouldn't take no for an answer. And yeah, there were a lot of moments, like, if you watch the movie, you'll see there's so many moments where she'll just be in the office and she's just always screaming at people. Like, she's swearing at people. She doesn't care. She'll come in, she demanded a job, like, from the lawyer. And it worked for her.
Yeah.
Like, she was insanely successful. So I think, like, you know, seeing that, how she didn't care what people thought about her or how people perceived her. And, you know, as soon as she thought that something was not right, she was there to correct that. So I just love that. I love movies like that showcase those types of personalities, because I really do think that it's very valuable, especially.
Were there scenes in the movie that you saw where you're like, oh, I do that?
I think I saw some scenes where I was like, I should do more of that.
Yeah.
Like, her getting mad, and I'm like, I should get more mad about things sometimes, you know? Like, take less bullshit from people. So
What about, like, the sampling stuff?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I remember, like, there's one point where she goes into the plant, and she's, like, secretly taking samples of, like, their, like, stormwater runoff or something, like these little drainage canals, and she just has these little, like, vials that she, with no gloves on, like, dipping her hand into the water.
Sometimes no shoes.
I was sitting there, yes, no shoes, no gloves, and I'm sitting there, and I'm like, put some freaking gloves on, like, you should know better, girl. But yeah, that was a bad health and safety moment, but HRP forward.
Exactly. Well, Carly, thanks so much for talking with us.
Of course, you bet. Anytime.
And we'll see you on the Play Hard section.
Yes, catch you there.
All right. Bye.
Peace out.
So we watched Erin Brockovich, and I am here with Alicia Washington. Alicia, this is a favorite movie of yours, is that right?
Yes, it is. Yes, I love this movie. Every time it's available, I'm watching it. So yeah, the whole house knows this movie very well.
What are some of the standout moments for you in the film?
Oh, there's many. You know, I love her tenacity. The way that she just pushes forward. I love how she loves her children so much and still works very hard. You know, I think that's a very hard balance for mothers, for sure. And, you know, she is really good with people. And that is a skill that not everyone has. And, you know, that is why I think, you know, she got to where she was and how this was able to happen, because she was able to bring people in a circumstance that was just awful and horrible, and people feeling completely excluded and isolated and discriminated against even. It was there's just a lot of the movie that is so, obviously it's a true story, but it is so real, and that kind of stuff is happening all over the country, where people, you know, are affecting local neighborhoods and communities in various ways. But this is in particular, this way is very common, and you really just not giving a crap, basically. And she was really a great advocate for these individuals, these families who lived in this specific county, and I think it brought a lot of people who saw that and felt like, that happens in my community. Like, I think she really made people feel like, okay, there's a chance that someone can help us, and holding people accountable for what they did wrong, especially big companies like that and what they did
absolutely.
wrong.
Now, for a lot of the geologists and engineers who work here, it was cool to see the movie because they got to see a little bit of what they do professionally on screen. Were there any moments in the film that kind of resonated with your own experiences as a professional working in AEC, but on the marketing side of it?
From not so much from a marketing standpoint, but having worked with environmental scientists and geologists for several years, understanding the problem, right, and knowing and when they went over the part where they didn't line the ponds, and that's why all of that contamination went into the groundwater. Learning that a long time ago, I worked for another environmental firm. Actually, coming into the industry, I worked at one the first 3 years of my career, and now I'm at another one. But so I've understood that for a long time. But just seeing that this kind of stuff does happen, unfortunately. Environmental engineering, environmental science, geology, right? That in the space that we work in, I think people may not understand exactly what it is. They kind of get it confused with maybe other sciences or maybe even other STEM. But it really is just about protecting the environment and protecting people. And watching that movie and seeing this very simple thing that they missed has, affected a whole community of people. I think for me, that was really what struck me just from the knowledge I have from working with geologists.
Yeah. All right. Well, Alicia, thanks for joining us and sharing your thoughts.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad we did this. It's one of my favorite movies, and I hope anyone who hasn't seen it, they definitely check it out.
Hi, Sam. So what did you think of the movie?
Okay. So I actually like it. I love it in a weird way. It was something I remember watching in college, and I could really relate to it back then as, let's say a woman working in a field where I was surrounded by clothing that was provocative, and I didn't have to wear it, but just selling it even, you kind of got these stereotypes around you and people treated you a certain way. And now as a single mom who at one point was struggling for a job and trying to find it, I'm able to relate to it on a totally different level. And it's weird, but I think I liked it even back then because it taught me something through the subtext, through, about drinking water and about things that come up that the normal everyday person doesn't actually get to see. I feel like it actually has a lot more, I don't even know what word to give it. There's a lot more depth to this movie than I think a lot of people would give it a chance for.
Definitely, yeah.
There's so much opportunity to learn and to understand the way the world works and to, I guess I told you before, researching, it brought up so many questions for me. And then being able to work at HRP, it's really easy to research it. So I got to learn a lot more about it. Chromium 6 and just all the different things that come up in drinking water and the problems they cause and just how easy it is to go through your daily life and not even notice this stuff.
Yeah.
But, like I said, from my perspective, I see this as this movie about this woman, and I can relate to her on so many different levels, struggling and how she has to push and, find this position, and then she excels in a field that she's not technically prepared for. She did not have any education in, and I completely relate.
Yeah, because you're self-taught in all the things that you do here. Yeah,
that is how I got the job. The interview with this company, with HRP, was hilarious. I did not expect anything to come from it, and I just made a really good impression. And the next thing I know, I'm interviewing with Maureen and 5 other people, which I was not expecting. And anyone who knows how shy I am knows that was the worst day ever. You turn on Teams and instead of one person, there's a dozen. And I'm like, oh, great, deer in headlights. But the confidence and answering the questions, and I got through it. And it was ridiculous because now I'm here and I'm permanent. And people come to me with questions about things that I have no business knowing, but I did because I figured it out on my own for fun. And I love it. I absolutely love it. So I have a new found respect for this movie. I didn't realize how much I related to it back then and how much of an impact it had on me. And now rewatching it, it's had a completely different impact.
Yeah.
And it may actually be one of my top 10 now.
That's awesome.
It kind of builds up the stereotypes, I think, in a funny way almost.
Yeah.
they're pushing them over the top on purpose. I happen to know Erin Brockovich did, from what I read about her, she really did dress provocatively, but not that provocatively. But the stereotypes were there, and I like watching the movie because you can actually see there's moments where they'll make a comment and they overplay it, and then they actually like laugh and try not to smile about it. And while that might make a movie seem like a bad movie, to me, it's being a lot more realistic about it and saying, okay, like this isn't really how it is. We're playing it up on purpose. And I feel like that's what the movie's really about, and not, just about a lawsuit. It's about a woman struggling and all the things she's gone through. And by this point in my life, I've gone through a lot of them, whether I expected to or not in 2001. I have lived through a lot of it. And maybe it set me up a little bit back then for what was to come without me knowing.
Yeah, maybe. Well, Sam, thanks so much for talking to us today. All right, Jane, we just watched Erin Brockovich. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's the second time I've seen that movie, and I still liked it. It holds up. I mean, for the most part. It's interesting, though, because whenever I see a movie based on real world, I always end up researching stuff after. So to see, what they got right, what they got wrong. But it's an interesting story, and it's not unique necessarily of these grassroots people finding something and going against the big company. But it certainly is a movie that shows it can be done. The waitress in this beginning scene is the actual Erin Brockovich.
Yeah, how cool is that, right?
I don't know. I've never gotten a $2 million bonus though. So,
well, still possible.
Yeah, maybe.
Just put together like the biggest class action lawsuit in history or whatever it was.
Yeah, I can totally do that. I think they over exaggerate the incompetence of the people at the water board, though. I mean, I've never had an experience like that going into town halls to get information. They would never leave you alone. Who knows? Must be different in California.
So it is a film that's kind of, you could say, set in our industry.
Yeah.
Besides that water board, were there other moments in the film that you thought kind of resonated with you in terms of the career that you've had?
Well, in the sense that I recognize what they were doing. I mean, it's a different perspective. When I came to Connecticut, I did start in the environmental side of things rather than stormwater, where I'm more at now. But, so that was very familiar to me and what they were doing. But we were on, we're the other side. We're working for the PG&Es of the company.
Yeah.
So it's different. It's but it'd be interesting, I mean, to sort of hear that story from their perspective in a sense, because clearly there was some wrongdoings, and at least in that particular instance of, falsifying records and deleting records and whatnot. And certainly I've never had that experience with the clients that I've worked with. Although there's been times where you sort of think, I mean, we as environmental consultants have to suggest the way a client should go down the road. These are what the regs say. You need to do these things. But ultimately it comes back to on them as whether or not they actually do them. So I would say that probably, in my experience anyway, a large percentage, if not, 99% of the companies that we work with do the right thing. But, they do clearly exist where they don't.
For sure.
I mean, thank goodness I've never been in the position where I've had a client tell me to do something completely illegal, like falsifying records or shredding things.
Yep. For the record, that has never happened.
That has never happened.
No one's asked Jane to do that.
No one has never asked me to do that.
Everything's been above the board.
100% honest. Now I sound like I'm lying.
Yes, international mastermind criminal.
From Canada. Not really. Oh, you know what I found out when I was researching it? But I mean, so they paid out, it's a billions of dollars company, and they paid out $333 million, which is, in a sense, a drop in the bucket for them. And so there is still contamination in that area from hex chromium. It's amazing. And then and you hear of all these other stories that have happened. In doing our research for the Women Wednesdays that we did, one of the people I researched was Margie Richards. It's a very similar story. People in her neighborhood were getting sick. They were next to I think it was Shell, Shell refinery and whatnot, and they had leaks underground. It ended up exploding. One of the pipelines exploded, knocked with enough pressure that it knocked somebody's house over onto a 16-year-old kid mowing lawn for his elderly neighbors.
Jeez.
Yeah. He was one of 2 people that died, but then there was also other illnesses too. And, but she got the community together to do the same thing, to go against Shell and get a payout and money for that community. But it's amazing that these things still keep happening.
Yeah.
You'd think we'd know better. When you know better, do better, that kind of thing.
You'd hope at some point.
But no, if we make enough movies, I guess.
We got to keep making the movies. That will fix it.
Yeah, that'll totally fix it.
All right, Jane, thanks for joining us. We'll see you over in the Play Hard section.
Definitely.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Welcome to the Play Hard section of 312 podcast.
We're really good at doing introductions.
Very.
So the HRP Women ERG, we decided we were going to bring some drinks from women-owned businesses. So our first drink is this wonderful punch here. It's like a cranberry refresher. Cheers.
Cheers. Clink.
Can't toast without actually drinking. And so it's from Hartford Flavor Company's Wild Moon line of different liqueurs. So it's got cranberry liqueur. I should start over. The original recipe is the cranberry liqueur, Prosecco, orange wedges, and limonada soda. But we modified it slightly due to lack of ingredients for a upscale or large scale amount. So we also added some of their lemon liqueur and extra cranberry juice and some lemonade and another bottle of Prosecco. So mix it up till it tasted good.
Yes, it's very
good. So that's
good.
our cranberry refresher HRP version.
Yes.
And what's the significance?
It is brought to you by a woman-owned distillery, which is based out of Hartford. It is called the Hartford Flavor Company. We also have a whiskey, which is the smoothest whiskey that I've ever tasted, from a company called
Uncle Nearest.
Yep, Uncle Nearest. It is a black woman-owned distillery out of Tennessee. And I believe the original recipe was from Nathan Green, who actually taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey.
Yes, it's believed he was a former slave, Nathan Nearest Green. It's believed that he perfected what they call the Lincoln County process, which is the filtration of whiskey through sugar maple charcoal, then aging the whiskey in charred oak barrels. That sentence I thought was going to go longer, so I did not have the right emphasis. But yeah, he apparently taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey, and after the Civil War, stayed on at the distillery as a free man, and was the first head distiller for Jack Daniels. And this Uncle Nearest Premium Whiskey has earned over 550 awards and accolades, including 65 best-in-class honors, and aims to highlight Nathan Green's legacy. And that is, I don't have the bottle here, but it's a nice whiskey.
Yeah.
It's got a nice flavor to it.
Like I said, super smooth. It tasted really
better
good.
than Jack Daniels.
Yep. It tasted really good with the mocktail version of the beverage that we made today. We just popped a little bit in to your own cup.
Yep.
And it tasted really good. Again, very smooth. You're not going to get that real burning sensation like you do with other whiskeys,
And
in my opinion.
That company is one of the fastest growing whiskey producers in America. And has an all-female leadership team that's the first of its kind.
Wow.
The team includes one of Green's descendants, master blender Victoria Eddy Butler, who's the first known black woman to master whiskey. First known black woman master whiskey blender in history.
Wow. Well, shout out to her.
Yes, I am reading because I don't have a memory.
Thank you, Jane, for your facts. I have not tried it, but I think I'm going to have to. I'm not a whiskey girl, but maybe Uncle Nearest will convince me.
And we have to give a shout out to Sarah, who can't be here today, but was the instrumental in finding these drinks and these companies so that we could bring them to the office today for our 312 party.
Snaps to you, Sarah. Thank you.
we're enjoying the afternoon. We can finally sit outside.
Finally get outside, get some fresh air. It's always
nice
good.
out.
I think so. Yeah,
It's really nice.
Nice.
It's like the time of year where it's like chilly in the morning, but then if you get a nice afternoon,
I love this time of
like,
year.
we're sitting out here with t-shirts.
T-shirts.
On. It was cold at first, but like
You get used to it.
you get
It's
used to it. It feels like spring.
Yeah, it's like when you take your first dip into the pool and you're like, ooh, that's chilly.
Yeah.
But then when you get all the way in, you're like, yeah, it's fine. It's
Right.
cool.
Perfect.
Yeah.
No, it's really nice. My favorite part of the party has definitely been the sausage and the peppers and the onions. I didn't have lunch today.
Yeah.
It was so good.
Yes.
And we're watching some basketball, and Kennesaw State almost beat Xavier, but they didn't. So that was really exciting. It's a great day.
I think for me, I'm going to go off of her answer. My favorite is also the sausages. I also did not bring my lunch because I knew we were going to have a lot of meat, food, burgers, and I came ready.
I don't disagree with those sentiments. Always a bonus. But I'm going to be all cheesy now. Because I think the best part about these days is the fact that we work at a company that puts these kind of events on.
Yeah.
And that,
and
the
we all get to
camaraderie.
hang out together.
Well, the camaraderie at HRP, I think, is far and above any of the other companies I've worked at. And I've always gotten along with people I work with. And certainly we've had company events. But there's something about HRP and putting together these types of events. And now that, I'm on the women's group now that we're bringing in. It was fun making the drink.
Yes, it was fun making the drink.
Allison helped me put our mix together today. Yes, this morning as we're madly trying to finish it before the food was done.
I'm usually very heavy-handed when I make my drinks, so if all of my friends know, I have like a 1, 2, 3 method, and sometimes that doesn't always work. I'm glad that Jane was there to be able to keep me from...
Well, just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's how I cook. So it's also how I mix drinks. But yeah, no, the camaraderie is the best part about the day. But second to having some... Well, not second to. The food is very much a close second.
Yes.
The food was good. I did enjoy
very good.
it.
So congrats to whoever was Rich Chandler and Dom, I think, did our grilling today. And Bubba helped. I know he was certainly giving tips. He'll give me a hard time for pointing that out.
I hope you have like workable things to work with, Tom. Yeah. And this isn't just like a chaotic.
I tried not to swear.
Yeah, I'm trying not to be completely cringy.
I've been doing this I'm an engineer for the company. I've only been at HRP for about a year and a half, coming up on 2 years in the summer. But certainly, I started my career over 20 years ago. When I graduated engineering, I think we had 19% women in the College of Engineering where I went to school, and also was pretty reflective of how that was pretty much the amount of women percentage-wise in industry as well. So being a female in a male-dominated industry, even despite the environmental side, tends to have more women. But certainly I have noticed over the years there's been a lot of more of the newer people coming out of school. There's a lot higher percentages. I don't know what they are currently anymore. It's been too long since I've been involved with that kind of stuff at school. But it's great to see younger women getting involved and coming into the industry, because it has been a boys' club. You sort of learn how to be one of the guys, which isn't a bad thing. But it's nice to have that a dynamic of being able to have female representation in the company and working with other women as well.
For me, I'm not a technical staff member. I work within CMS, our corporate marketing team. And I know for me, I was really excited when we started the HRP Women's ERG group. I was very involved in my women's group when I was in university, and I really wanted to be able to take that same experience and put it forward in my career. I'm super, super excited for all the things that the ERG has plans coming up. I'm super excited for Sarah and Jane and Carly to be able to take the helm and be able to really lead the group. so much stuff that's coming up. I can't wait to see it, and I can't wait for the group to grow and really be able to make an impact for not just HRP, but for also the industry as a whole, because, you know, Jane was right. There's more women that are coming to STEM fields, and engineering specifically has taken a growth in women. But, you know, there's still more things that we have to do. There's still more, you know, issues that need to be addressed, like harassment on sites and, you know, not seeing enough leadership really as women.
Yeah, I agree with that sentiment 100%. I was going to say the three of us have gotten to work together a lot more recently through the Women's ERG, and I'm grateful for that in and of itself, because the women's group really brings together everybody in a way that we wouldn't be brought together otherwise. Like, you're in
Agreed.
the
We're all in
engineering
3 different groups.
Exactly,
and
right.
you get
And,
to-
you know, we all work at HRP, but I don't work with the engineers a lot. And so the fact that we get to, you know, meet often and chat about stuff and put stuff together, and it's been very rewarding so far. And we haven't even, it's only been a couple months or a couple weeks, you know, so
Yeah, true.
we have a lot more ahead of us. Yeah, I'm super excited for this upcoming year.
Yeah.
For the Women's ERG.
It's interesting, as someone who's been around for a while, you know, I never really thought about that I was usually one of few women in the group. Like, the big companies I've worked at, I would be one of maybe 2 scientist level women in the company, aside, you know, taking out from admin, where of course is dominated by women. You know, but then, you know, when looking at the scientist level and manager level side of things, it was very, very few. And so being a part of the women's group has actually, and I, you know, was a member last year and took on the vice chair role this year. So whatever that may be, but or however, hopefully it'll turn out well. I'm trying.
I believe in you. I believe in you. You're doing great. You're doing great.
But, you know, it's been nice to, you know, I don't think I really recognized how much I missed having female co-workers that you have that you can go and talk to about, you know, various work-related things or even personal things. You know, it's a different dynamic than when you're, you know, goofing off with the men in the company,
Yeah.
which is, like I said, also a great part of this company, that we have interaction across the board in this company of people supporting each other, and it's fantastic.
Yeah. Yeah, when I came to HRP, I was so excited to hear that there would be women working here. Like, I didn't even, you know, it's great that we have this podcast and stuff so that we could talk about it and showcase it in a way of, like, come work with us, because we have such a great network of women here and women in leadership and women doing all sorts of stuff, and, like, you could be part of it, you know? So that's definitely a really fun thing to showcase, but that wasn't my expectation, I have to say. Like, that wasn't a reason I chose HRP. It was happenstance, and I'm so happy that it turned out that way, because I had so many other work experiences where I was the only woman, and, you know, it's definitely like I had an internship in industry. I was lucky if I laid eyes on a woman in a singular day. Like, I would go my entire work day and not even, you know, I would just be working with, it was a boys club. Like, I was just talking to, you know, all guys, and those were my people to look up to, my role models. But it's definitely different to come here and
I think it's important to have role models of different areas too, and different cultures and different ways of thinking than what you may have, because you learn that way. And so whether it's, you know, having, you know, I've never really had female managers that I've worked for in the past, because again, engineering, not as many women, but certainly, like I said, that's changed a lot. But even like the men that I've had as mentors over the years, it gives you a different perspective. And same thing, I think, for younger men coming into the company, that they'll see that this is a company that has strong women leadership as well as strong male leadership, and you learn those different perspectives, because it's important to see the world from different
lenses. Yeah.
So
I know for me, I've usually always worked in a very female-driven industry. Marketing itself is highly female-run, and I think that I always strive to be able to push women to be able to excel in any field, regardless of what you're doing. We want to be able to push each other forward. And I think that as women, we have an obligation to each other to lend a hand and support each other whenever we can.
Cheers. Happy Friday.
Cheers!
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
Carly, you want to do the outro?
Sure. Thank you for joining us today for the Play Hard section of the 312 podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast, listening to us talk about the Women's Erg and the sausage party and March Madness, etc., etc. We sure had a great time, and we're going to go. I think we have a little basketball tournament waiting for us ourselves. So, like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, send to all of your friends and family.
Put it in your group chats.
Put it in your group chats. And we will see you next time. Signing off.